Well, first, I wouldn't call it spending on defense. I would call it spending on military because it's got a lot of offense in it. It's
Pardon
about
me.
war making.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. And I think there's another problem, which is generals want to try out their new weapons. And when you have a large military, it's very hard anyway to just have it sit there. You could do training and so on, but part of the fact, weird as it sounds, and I don't think I'm being naive, when you have a huge military outlay, you tend to use it, by the way. And the U.S. is constantly using it in theater operations, in local operations, and so on. It's quite exaggerated and dangerous. Remember, because of this history of the U.S. empire after World War II, the U.S. has 800 overseas military bases in about 80 countries. My God, that's a lot. Much too much. I actually think there should be an international norm and rule that nobody should station their troops outside of their national borders. Wouldn't that be interesting? We couldn't have these wars. And it makes perfect sense. Your military should be for defense, and it should not be for offense. You should not have networks of vast overseas bases. By the way, the only two countries that have huge networks of bases are the United States and Britain. Britain completely as a legacy, of course. It's a small island, not very economically strong right now, but it still has military bases all over the world, essentially used by the United States, by the way. These are places where U.S. aircraft can land or get refurbished or get rearmed and so on. But I think the point is we need a completely different multilateral approach. There's a doctrine that I really like in the UN system, back to the UN Charter, but then really amplified in international law in the 1960s, and that is non-intervention. The idea is don't intervene in the internal affairs of other countries. You can have diplomacy with them, but don't meddle in their internal affairs. Now, if we abided by that norm, we wouldn't have these wars, actually. If the United States did not have military bases abroad, there would never be a war in Ukraine now, because the war in Ukraine emerged because the United States was trying to push NATO into Ukraine and actually into Georgia. And in the eastern boundary of the Black Sea, as part of a strategy that goes back to Britain in 1856. Britain already had the idea under Lord Palmerston that you should surround Russia in the Black Sea region to limit Russia's capacity to project power. And Palmerston pursued the Crimean War between 1853 and 1856 to kick the Russian fleet out of the Black Sea. And so it was eerie to hear Zelensky talk in his New Year's address as the focus for Ukraine is to kick Russia out of the Black Sea. Zelensky, of course, is kind of just the puppet who's mouthing the words of his bosses, the United States and UK. But what he's mouthing is the words of Lord Palmerston of 170 years ago. It's unbelievable. Still talking about we need to reduce Russia's influence in the Black Sea. Little trite. Come on, let's grow up. So I think that the point is, we need a different approach in which the major powers back off, stop spending hundreds of billions of dollars on armaments. Look what's happening in your region in Southeast Asia. It's becoming militarized. Everyone's supposed to choose sides. There's a new AUKUS, the Australia, US, UK alliance to have nuclear-powered submarines in Australia to police the South China Sea. Are you crazy, US? Come on. Or the Quad, which is supposed to surround China. This is like playing a board game. If we were playing chess or Risk, okay. But this is the real world. We should grow up. We should have diplomacy. We should stop trying to corner each other. And we should back off and give space to each other so that we're not on each other's borders with trigger strategies that could lead to war. And the United States now, in what surely is absolutely the stupidest imaginable idea, is shipping increased armaments to Taiwan. Exactly the way that it did in Ukraine, that eventually led the Russians to say, okay, we're not accepting this. We're going to clean this out. You think the Chinese are going to sit back and just watch the U.S. arm Taiwan to the teeth? It's so naive, so dangerous, so provocative, but that's the U.S. idea.
Jeff, I want to take you back to what you had alluded to earlier about the U.S. politics being influenced by public opinion and special interest groups. And I'm curious as to what your views are with respect to what would unravel with Ukraine. And I want to, also, make reference to, some of the predictions that have been made by your good friend, John Mearsheimer, about Ukraine, right? What do you think will unfold in Ukraine, given the obvious limitations of politics in the U.S. that we're witnessing? Just walk us through what could happen in the next year or two.
We have to understand what the Ukraine war is really about. The Ukraine war is really about a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia over influence in Ukraine. Look at a map. Who would you expect to have more influence in Ukraine, Russia or the United States? I'll go with Russia. First of all, it's the next door neighbor. It's the next door neighbor. Second, Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire for hundreds of years. Third, it is linguistically, culturally, religiously close to Russia. But the United States gets this idea. No, we can't let Russia have influence in Ukraine. This is a typical evangelical imperial idea. Very British, by the way, as I said, because the British had the same idea in the 1850s. Literally, Britain and France teamed up to try to push Russia out of the Black Sea. And that was the Crimean War. And we're in the second one now. So we have this very weird idea. The United States could not leave well enough alone. It decided, well, we need to push our military into Ukraine and into Georgia. That idea came already in the early 1990s, and it was actually explained in detail by Zbigniew Brzezinski, the U.S. Geopolitical strategist, in writings in 1997. And then George W. Bush Jr. tried to implement it by announcing in 2008 that NATO would enlarge to Ukraine and to Georgia. Quickly, Russia beat up Georgia and said, don't even think about it. And in Ukraine, a cascade of crisis emerged. But most importantly, Ukraine elected a president in 2010, Viktor Yanukovych, who said, we'll be neutral. Thank you very much. We'll be neutral. Stay out. But the United States couldn't stand that, so they worked to depose him. And in February 2014, worked to overthrow Yanukovych. So Russia's watching the U.S. pursue a regime change operation next door. Think of it from a U.S. perspective. If China were in Mexico City overthrowing the Mexican government so that the new government could announce that it will have Chinese military bases on the Rio Grande, the United States might be a little unhappy with that. Well, that was the situation as it unfolded in Ukraine in February 2014. Putin took back Crimea, which is where their naval base is. He wasn't claiming it beforehand. He was just had a long-term lease on it.
Right.
But then when the United States moved in February 2014 and worked to overthrow the government, Putin said, I'm not going to let Sevastopol, a naval base, fall to NATO. Are you kidding? So he took Crimea back. Then what ensued over the next 8 years was lots of complication, which I won't go into detail, but essentially the U.S. arming a anti-Russian regime that had been installed in Kiev and building up towards war. And Putin kept saying, stop this. You know, there were the Minsk treaties, and then there was Putin's proposal for a security arrangement with the United States at the end of 2021. And the U.S. position was, we don't negotiate with Russia. Russia's, you know, as they said, a gas station with nuclear weapons, but it's a second-rate power, was the U.S. attitude. Putin said, okay, we'll see. And this is where we are right now. Now, this war should never have happened. Right. It is a war based on American stupidity, I'll say, and arrogance. The off-ramp came in 2008, in 2014, in 2021, and in April 2022, when Ukraine said, okay, we'll be neutral. And the United States said, hell no, you keep fighting. We'll keep arming you. You keep fighting. Okay, that's why we have this war going on. Ukraine is never going to join NATO, period. Because Russia's going to defeat Ukraine through conventional arms. But if for whatever reason that didn't happen, it's going to go nuclear. Ukraine is not going to join NATO. And the United States leaders need to get it through their thick skulls that they have to stop pushing this, because there can't be peace otherwise. And this current situation's no good for anybody, least for Ukraine, of course, which has lost territory now that Russia didn't even claim 3 years ago. But because of the war, it's claiming it. And Ukraine is losing hundreds of thousands of fighters who are dying or becoming severely wounded. The society and the economy has broken apart. This was all predictable. I called it right at the beginning. I wrote an article called The Neocons' Latest Debacle, because I said, as soon as this started, this is stupid. Can you understand anything, you people in Washington? Don't do this. You can't win. Ukraine will lose. And I tried to talk to the Ukrainian authorities about this, because I know a thing or two. I actually advised Ukraine's President Kuchma back in 1994. I advised Yeltsin. I know the region. They said, oh, you're just a Putin apologist. I said, I'm trying to help you. You don't understand. You're getting into a dead end, literally, this way. And I'm trying to help spare you this disaster. Well, they couldn't understand it. They thought I was just pro-Russian propagandist, frankly. But the point is, all of this disaster was predictable. And I tried to talk the White House out of this. I mean, I'm just one person, you know, an academic, but I know people. And I told them at the end of 2021, don't go to war over this. Negotiate with Russia over this. Negotiate. Well, they couldn't hear that. So here we are. And I say every day, Biden needs to pick up the phone and say to President Putin, you know what? That NATO enlargement wasn't a good idea. We're not going to do that. We'll say that publicly. We'll stop this fighting. Let's work this out politically. And I keep offering he can use my cell phone. He can use my Zoom account. Any way he wants to call, he can do it. But they don't do it yet. But that's what they should do.
Wow. Let's switch to Gaza, right?
Yeah.
How do you think Zionism has evolved all these years since the mid part of the 19th century?
Well, not well, unfortunately, right now. Not in a way that can even survive in its current form.
Right.
What happened in Israel was several steps of change of ideas, aims, and even culture in a way. Because Zionism started as the Jews need a homeland because of discrimination and hardship in Europe, which was no doubt, and the Holocaust proved the absolute unimaginable worst of it. But it went from a homeland to a state. A state could have been manageable alongside a Palestinian state, but that didn't emerge. What emerged was Israel. The Palestinian side rejected the compromise at the beginning. Israel won a war of independence, so-called, in 1948. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced and never were able to return to their homes. And this then proceeded in series of conflicts in 1956, but then especially in 1967 to another war in which Israel proved its predominance over the Palestinian territories, which mean three areas: Gaza, the West Bank of the Jordan River, and East Jerusalem. And these are the three areas that would constitute Palestine alongside Israel. Now, what happened after 1967 was very, very unfortunate for Israel. Of course, even more unfortunate for the Palestinian people, you could say. But what happened for Israel was that it got itself into a disaster by creating disaster for Palestine. And that is that after the 67 war, a cultural change emerged for a variety of reasons, some secular, but many religious, among fervent religious Jews who said, okay, now we should dominate the whole region. We won. The religious Jews said that's God's blessing, God's backing. The hyper-religious Jews, many of them, not everything's complicated, but many of them said at the time, you know, if you go back to the Hebrew Bible, especially the sixth book of the Bible called the Book of Joshua, it says that all of this land is promised to us. And so a religious movement started in the early 1970s that said, well, we conquered this land. We should never give it back. This is our land. And at the beginning, it was a fringe idea because really the origin of Zionism was a secular origin, not a religious origin. It had to do with people of a particular religion, but it was led by people who were not themselves religious. And it was a secular idea about a homeland. But starting in the 1970s, it became a fervent religious movement also. This is very unusual and hard for more secular people to understand. But what happened was some of the most religious people in Israel became the most ardent opponents of a two-state solution. And over time, they actually became the dominant political force. And this is not well understood, I would say, in Israel's major backer, which is the United States. because the U.S. has backed Israel basically since 1948. But most people in the United States think of Israel as a kind of a besieged country that is in a dangerous neighborhood and should therefore be protected. But what they don't realize is what a weird ideology based on fundamentalist religion took hold that claims as a God-given right the ability to dominate the Palestinian people. And not only dominate them, but ethnically cleanse them or kill them or do whatever Israel has to do, so-called, in order to dominate. Well, this is completely unacceptable by any rational standard. And Israel is not acting rationally. It's acting in extreme violation of international law with extreme brutality in the quest of a messianic idea, which is completely unacceptable and therefore is in a creating, of course, disaster for the Palestinians, but also disaster for itself, because its politics are totally unacceptable to the rest of the world. And Israel's left with one backer, and that's the United States. And inside the United States, this backing is not very strong anymore because the young people in the United States are shocked. They're not part of this at all. They're saying, are you kidding? We're supporting that. And they see the massacres going on and they don't like it. And so Biden is finding, to his real surprise, this isn't good politics, because American politicians also thought that it was always good politics to back Israel. But it's not good politics to back zealotry and extremism that is so extreme that it's leading to massive war crimes. That's not good politics. And Biden is absolutely losing support domestically. So here we are at the start of 2024 in a complete crisis and mess. But one should understand, Netanyahu is not going to back down on his own, because his whole cabinet is filled with these zealots.
Right-wingers,
This is not rational calculation. This is irrational belief in God's gift to Israel of the right to control all of this land, which is, whatever they think, never going to be accepted by the rest of the world, by the Palestinian people, by the Arab and Islamic world. No way. So the way to stop this is for the United States to tell Israel, look, you can believe what you want, you can do what you want, but not with our munitions. That's all. And then Israel can't do this an extra day. Israel can't fight this war on its own military industry. This is a war fought on U.S. military industry.
I want to push on this a little bit. At the rate, look, what happened on October 7th is something we must condemn. But what's happened thereafter seems to have weakened the moral authority of Israel and the West at large, to some extent, or to a large extent. And we're witnessing some sort of a political implosion within Israel. In the context of all this, and not to mention, the political disconnect between the public and the U.S. and what, the White House is doing with respect to Israel, what is the prospect of a two-state solution now, which has kind of like disappeared in the past few years going forward?
Well, I think like every event, it's almost never right to think of an event, even an event as shocking as October 7th, as a standalone or as a beginning of something. By the way, even 4 days before October 7th, Jewish religious zealots had stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex, one of the holiest sites of Islam. And so there was an immediate provocation 3 days before. But as in any conflict, you can go back decades. This is an unresolved political and social crisis. It never had a quiet moment. And so it needed a political resolution October 6th or October 8th or October 7th. It's not an event that started at that moment. And it's the same thing about Ukraine. Ukraine crisis did not start on October 24th, 2022 with Russia's special military operation. It goes back 30 years. And we need to understand that we're dealing with the need for political solutions to deep and ongoing wounds, and that don't have a one-day explanation or a one-day start date. So this is the first point. Now, what Israel in this government, because of the history that I very quickly summarized, of deciding that it is going to dominate all of Palestine, has put itself in a situation that is completely untenable. That's all. There's no solution on the basis of the Israeli government's current beliefs. I'm a believer in the international order as vital for our survival. I don't believe that the highest politics is at the nation state. I think the highest politics is at the global community. And in this case, when you see this crisis now for 75 years and actively for 56 years since the 1967 war, and after dozens of UN resolutions in the Security Council and the General Assembly, my own view is that the Security Council, which has the authority to do it, should impose a solution. It should impose the two-state solution. It should do it today, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
I think the UN Security Council should simply immediately recognize the state of Palestine as a sovereign state UN member with the borders of the 4th of June, 1967, meaning Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank. The UN Security Council should mobilize peacekeeping forces. It can be Arab, it can be U.S., it can be others, to keep the two states apart from each other. But it should just impose this now.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers in Palestine, but they settled there after having been told for decades that's illegal. You're in someone else's country. You can't do that as an occupying force. So that's going to have to be resolved.
Yeah.
But, they're there in part, not everyone, but a lot of them are there because they are religious zealots who think that God gave them the right to be there. But you know what? They have no legal right to be there. And so this needs to be resolved by the international system, not by these two parties, which cannot do it on their own.
Look, Jeff, I gotta end this discussion with an economic question posed to an economist. We've seen many parts of the world or the global economy running on the wheels of massive quantitative easing, right? Is this something that you believe is sustainable? Or do you believe that there's this new economic philosophy or statecraft that would be more feasible for the world over going forward?
Well, I think the first point is the monetary system is not the real economy. The monetary system is there to facilitate transactions in the real economy.
Right.
You can't make an economy rich by printing money, period. This is the first thing we study and learn and teach in economics. So there are short-term debates about higher or lower interest rates, but focus on the real economy. Second, the real economy in the 21st century depends utterly on skills. So if any country wants to be successful, the single most important thing to do by far is educate your children, period. It's the number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 priority. Your children should be highly literate, numerate. They should be aware of the world. They should understand digital technologies. They should know the world that they are going to be working in, and many of them are going to be helping to guide and to lead. So education, by far the most important single investment that any society makes. Third point, given our technologies, solutions and industry get built at a regional scale. Even a country with the population the size of Indonesia doesn't go it alone. ASEAN is really important for Indonesia. Indonesia is really important for ASEAN, but even ASEAN's not big enough. Definitely good, close relations with China, for example. Economically, absolutely essential. Build infrastructure, connect with rail, with fiber, with the zero carbon power systems. The region that I really like is the so-called RCEP region, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which has 10 ASEAN countries, 3 Northeast Asian countries, China, Japan, and Korea, and 2 oceanic countries, Australia and New Zealand. Now that group, that's a terrific group, very diverse, very successful. If the RCEP region got together and said, you know, we're going to clean up our economies, we're going to interconnect with zero carbon energy, we're going to interconnect with advanced 5G or 6G technology, this would be the most dynamic region of the world economy. Instead, the United States is saying, oh, no, don't deal with China. You need to divide. You need to keep separate. We need a military alliance. So tell the United States, go home, chill out, let us do our own thing. And then you'd have this incredible dynamism in East Asia. And there's no reason why China, Japan, and Korea, for example, can't get along. And Japan's hostility to China is completely misplaced. You know, in 2,000 years of being neighbors, China never invaded Japan, even once, except with the footnote that when the Mongols were ruling China in 1274 and 1281, they tried twice. The kamikaze winds defeated them, but China never invaded Japan. So Japan should realize it's not your enemy. Just cooperate. And this would change the dynamics. And the United States, which knows the least of everything, should be told, go home, chill out. We're just fine. We don't want an arms race. We don't want a war over Taiwan. We don't need all your military bases here. We don't want conflict. And then you'd really have prosperity in the East Asian region.